Let me share a story about something that happened 2 years ago, a time when everything in my life started to fall apart. Back then, my daughter was just 3 years old. Because of my demanding work schedule, I didn't get to spend as much time with her as I wanted. Every moment I did spend with her was incredibly special to me. She was at that wonderful age where kids start saying their first meaningful words, and I cherished every one of those moments. My wife, who stayed at home to take care of our daughter, handled most of the parenting responsibilities. Meanwhile, I was working 6 days a week. I had recently been promoted to a job that I wasn't fully qualified for, but it paid well. On top of everything, we were expecting another baby. Since my daughter started talking, spending time with her became a lot more fun. She began speaking a little later than most kids her age, but once she started, she didn't stop, and I absolutely loved it. Hearing her talk was a constant reminder of why I worked so hard every day, to provide for my family. One Sunday evening, I was doing my favorite thing of the week, hanging out with my daughter and watching a movie together. Our 6-year-old pit bull was with us too. I really enjoyed those moments when she would comment on what she saw on TV. If there was a cat on the screen, she would mention my grandma's cat. If there was a dog, she would shout out the name of our pit bull. And when she saw someone who looked like me on the screen, she would point and say, "Dada," which was her way of saying daddy. If someone looked like my brother, she'd say uncool, meaning uncle. She kept doing this until she either got tired or fell asleep. These days, it's hard to find a movie without some romantic scenes, even in PG-15 movies. I avoid watching R-rated movies with my 3-year-old, but finding a film without romance is challenging. That evening, we were watching Wonder Woman 1984, which isn't really a romantic movie. It's family-friendly, something I felt comfortable watching with my daughter. Plus, with a female superhero as the main character, I hoped it would empower her and boost her self-esteem as she grew up. Then came a part of the movie where Wonder Woman, played by Gal Gadot, had a romantic scene with Chris Pine's character. That's when things got interesting. During that scene, my daughter suddenly said, "That's Mama and Udo." She called her mother Mama and me Dada. But I was puzzled. Who was Udo? First, I thought she had misspoken. We had family members who visited often, but I'd never heard her call anyone Udo before. I had no idea who Udo could be. I thought about her words for a few minutes and decided to rewind the scene to see if she would say Udo again. Sure enough, she did. I turned to her, looked into her innocent, beautiful eyes, and softly asked, "Who is Udo?" She pointed to the ceiling, which didn't make any sense to me. I wondered if she was pointing to God or something like that. To test it further, I played a different movie with a romantic scene to see if she would react the same way. To my surprise, she said the exact same thing, "Udo." This made me wonder if she was trying to tell me something important, but I had no idea what it could be. Who is Udo? Became the biggest mystery in my life at that time. Some people might argue that you can't trust what children say or remember, and I would usually agree with that. However, around that time, I had read a news story about a 3-year-old who remembered their past life and even identified their murderer. Children can sometimes have a special wisdom, especially at that age. I knew that story was about reincarnation, which was different from my situation, but the uncanny similarities in age and the recent encounter with that story made me believe that children could be oracles of some sort. It was such a surreal situation, and the biggest mystery for me was figuring out who Udo was. I couldn't ask my wife about Udo because I was worried she might lie to me, although at that time, I had complete trust in her and expected nothing but honesty. Speaking of my wife, she was born in the Middle East and came to America with her family as a teenager. She was raised as a Muslim. My parents also migrated from the same country as hers, but I was born here in the US. We were introduced through family connections, so our marriage had strong family support. We both identified as Muslims, but we weren't extremely religious. We observed Islamic traditions and festivities and attended mosque on Fridays occasionally. My wife sometimes wore a hijab, but it was her choice and I didn't ask her to do it. Honestly, I didn't really mind either way. At the time, she was 28 years old, and I was 34. She was studying psychology in college, and before we started our family, she worked as a high school teacher. We had decided together that she should become a stay-at-home mom to take care of our children. while I continued to work to provide for our family. Let me tell you more about my story. I work as a financial manager, and I'm still relatively young to hold such a position at a big bank. About 7 months ago, we moved into our current apartment because I received a promotion. This promotion required us to relocate, but it came with a significant pay increase, over $60,000 more per year. With that background in mind, let me continue. I remember one particular night when I was putting my baby to sleep. The mystery of who Udo could be was still on my mind. The thought of confronting my wife never crossed my mind, though. Accusing her of something so serious without any real evidence seemed foolish. After all, my wife was an incredible partner in every way. She was loving, took care of the household chores, cooked amazing meals, and we had a healthy and happy relationship. There were no signs that anything was wrong. So why would I accuse her of having an affair just because our daughter mentioned the name Udo while watching a movie? Seemed like a wild idea. Honestly, I had no idea who Udo could be, and I figured it might just be something my daughter made up. Accusing someone of infidelity without solid proof is a serious matter. And once you say something like that, you can't take it back. I decided that my next step should be to find out who Udo really was, if he was even a real person. Even though the thought of my wife having an affair with someone named Udo bothered me, I ended up forgetting about it the next day and went back to my usual routine. Fast forward 2 months. It had been 9 months since we moved into our new apartment. One day, we were out for a walk at a community park near our place. It was me, my daughter, my wife, and our dog. Suddenly, we crossed paths with a man who was also walking his dog from the opposite direction. The strange thing was that our dog seemed to recognize his dog immediately. Both dogs acted like they were old friends, and our dog started running toward the stranger and his dog. I quickly pulled on the leash to stop our dog. I glanced at my wife, and she seemed to be trying her best to ignore what was happening, avoiding eye contact and looking straight ahead. Then, something even stranger happened. When my daughter saw the man, she called out, "Budo! Budo!" She said it with the same familiarity she would use for any of my relatives. But the man reacted differently. He acted like he didn't know her at all. He ignored us and kept walking, pulling his dog along, as if he were just a random person who didn't recognize any of us. I made eye contact with the man, gave him a polite smile, and he smiled back before continuing on his way. The whole encounter felt very strange. There was an awkward energy in the air, even though the interaction with the man only lasted a few seconds. Felt much longer. I looked at my wife again, and she was still staring straight ahead, as if she hadn't noticed what just happened. I asked her if she knew the man, and she responded dismissively, saying he was just an upstairs neighbor, someone she barely knew. But then, I questioned how our daughter knew his name if he was just an upstairs neighbor. My wife explained that the man often let his dog off the leash, and his dog would come looking for our dog. Apparently, they had interacted several times, and he would greet our daughter. It sounded like a reasonable explanation, but there was one thing that kept bothering me. 2 months earlier, when my daughter saw a romantic scene in a movie and called out "Mama" and Udo, I had no idea who Udo could be. But now, it turned out that Udo was the same person my daughter just called out to, our neighbor. Coincidence? I didn't think so. And when I asked my daughter who Udo was back then, she pointed to the ceiling, which was odd. Now, my wife confirmed that Udo was indeed our upstairs neighbor. This couldn't be just a coincidence. Something strange was going on, and I was determined to find out what it was. My wife was acting oddly, and I never thought she would lie to me. But now, I couldn't help but feel like there was more to the story. Up until that day, I had never caught my wife in a lie. But after the encounter with Udo, something felt off. There was a strange, suspicious feeling in the air. We walked in silence for the rest of our stroll, and my mind was racing with all sorts of thoughts. What if my wife really was having an affair? The idea that she could be close to another man disgusted me. Even though I had no concrete evidence, just the thought alone made me feel uneasy. As we neared our apartment, my wife must have sensed that something was wrong. She asked me what was going on, but I brushed it off, saying nothing, and stayed quiet. I was too lost in my own thoughts to talk about it. When we got home, I couldn't help myself. I abruptly asked my wife the name of the man we had encountered at the park. She seemed upset by my sudden question and claimed she didn't know him, which caught me off guard. It was clear she sensed that I was suspicious, but I knew it wasn't the right time to confront her. I needed to gather more evidence before making any accusations. That was all I could think about the next day. If there's smoke, there's fire, right? I decided to go online in search of answers. I found forums where I could share my story and document everything. I hoped that by sharing my experience, I might find support or advice from someone who had gone through a similar situation. Maybe someone could tell me if I was just being paranoid and risking my marriage for no reason. The first thing I needed to do was find out the real name of the guy we saw at the park. If his name wasn't actually Udo, maybe Udo was just his dog's name. If that were the case, my suspicions would fall apart because it would be impossible for my wife to be romantically involved with a dog. I also realized that I shouldn't take my daughter's words too seriously. After all, she's only 3 years old, and her imagination can run wild. But the doubt lingered, and people on the forum suggested I hire a private investigator to uncover the upstairs neighbor's identity. I couldn't go snooping through his mail or follow him myself, especially with my busy work schedule. Taking time off work to track his movements and find out more about him was tempting, but it seemed like hiring a private investigator would be more convenient and less emotionally draining. I found a private investigator online who specialized in infidelity cases. I gave him the gate code to our apartment complex and explained my schedule. His first task was to discover the neighbor's name, where he worked, his daily routine, and any potential relationship with my wife. The first week of the investigation was incredibly stressful. I had to act normal around my wife and go about my daily routine as if nothing was happening. I wanted her to let her guard down and not suspect anything. I made sure to stay at work longer than usual, just to keep up appearances. At this stage, I was still in the process of finding out the truth, and everything was based on speculation and circumstantial evidence. It was important for me not to harbor any hate toward my wife until I had more concrete information. After a week, I met up with the private investigator at a prearranged spot to hear his report. He had discovered that the man's first name was Hugo, but for obvious reasons, I can't disclose his full last name. Hugo was 38 years old, recently divorced, and had 2 kids. He shared custody with his ex-wife, who had gotten the house in their divorce settlement, which is why he was now living in our apartment complex. Hugo had a girlfriend and was into fitness. The investigator also revealed that Hugo worked as a logistics manager at a distribution company, with several employees under him, most of whom were female. The investigator handed me a folder containing pictures of my wife and daughter at the dog park, sitting on the same bench as Hugo while their dogs played together. According to the investigator, their interaction seemed friendly, but there was no physical contact or signs of affection. However, the fact that my wife had lied about not knowing Hugo or his name was deeply troubling. There were multiple photos of them chatting together, yet she had claimed to barely know him. Now, I had strong reasons to believe that my daughter was right all along. Hugo did sound a lot like Udo. The most disturbing part was the possibility that my daughter might have witnessed something inappropriate between them. This thought still bothers me to this day. We've always been careful to keep any displays of affection private, especially around our daughter. Even though I would describe our relationship as healthy, we aren't the type to show affection outside of the bedroom. The private investigator asked if I wanted him to continue the investigation, and I decided to retain his services for 2 more weeks to see if he could uncover any further information. To be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I needed to find out the truth. No matter what it might be, I can't even begin to describe the mixture of emotions that overwhelmed me as I watched that footage. The shock, the betrayal, and the intense sadness were almost too much to bear. I had suspected for months, but actually seeing my wife in the arms of another man, especially when she was carrying our child, was like a punch to the gut. The fact that it happened right in our home, where I had trusted her completely, made it even more devastating. As I watched Hugo embrace her, kissing her neck and touching her in ways that only a husband should, it felt like my world was crashing down. The worst part was the uncertainty about the baby she was carrying. Was it mine, or was it Hugo's? The thought that my wife's betrayal might extend to something as profound as the paternity of our child was almost too much to handle. It was the kind of situation you never imagine finding yourself in until it happens. But as painful as it was, the footage gave me the undeniable proof I needed. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was reality. My daughter, in her innocent way, had tried to tell me something 4 months ago, and now everything made sense. All the lies, the evasions, the strange behavior, it all pointed to this moment. I knew I couldn't let this go unaddressed. As much as I wanted to hold on to the life we had built, to the love I thought we shared, I couldn't ignore the truth. My wife had betrayed me not just once, but likely over the course of several months, and possibly with more than just Hugo. The trust we had was shattered beyond repair. Confronting her was inevitable, but it wasn't something I could rush into. I needed to gather my thoughts, plan my approach, and make sure that I was fully prepared for whatever might come next. Would she admit to everything, or would she try to deny it even in the face of clear evidence? And what about our daughter? How would this affect her? The thought of breaking up our family was heartbreaking, but I knew I couldn't continue living a lie. In that moment, I resolved to confront my wife, not with anger or accusations, but with the calm certainty that comes from knowing the truth. I had loved her deeply, and that love deserved honesty, even if it meant the end of our marriage. I would give her the chance to explain herself, but I knew that nothing she said could undo the betrayal or repair the damage that had been done. As I prepared for the confrontation, I was filled with a sense of sorrow and loss, but also with a strange sense of relief. The months of suspicion, of doubting my own sanity, were finally over. I had the truth, and now I could begin the painful process of moving on. Whatever that might look like. 2 days later, the weight of the situation continued to press down on me. My wife had moved into the spare room as agreed, and the atmosphere in our home was tense and suffocating. The once warm and loving environment was now cold and filled with resentment. Every time I saw her, it was a painful reminder of her betrayal, and the uncertainty about the baby's paternity only made it worse. Despite everything, I tried to focus on my responsibilities. Work was a welcome distraction, allowing me to temporarily escape the chaos at home. But even at work, my thoughts would often drift back to the situation, and I found it hard to concentrate. The anger I had managed to suppress during our confrontation began to bubble up inside me. How could she betray me like this after everything I had done for her? I had treated her with nothing but respect, provided for our family, and remained faithful, yet she had repaid me with lies and infidelity. In the days that followed, I reached out to a lawyer to discuss my options. Divorce seemed inevitable, but the situation was complicated by the fact that she was pregnant. The lawyer advised me to wait until the baby was born before taking any legal action, as the paternity of the child needed to be established first. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that I had to endure her presence for several more months while everything was sorted out. I also began searching for a babysitter, as I couldn't rely on my wife to continue caring for our daughter. It was clear that our marriage was over, and I needed to prepare for life as a single father. The thought of raising my daughter alone was daunting, but I knew I had to do whatever it took to protect her and provide a stable environment. As for my wife, she remained remorseful and pleaded with me daily not to go through with the divorce. She claimed she had made a terrible mistake and promised that she would never betray me again. But her words rang hollow in my ears. The trust between us was broken beyond repair, and there was no going back to the way things were. I also couldn't forget the risk she had put me in by sleeping with a man who had multiple partners. The thought of potentially contracting a life-threatening STD because of her recklessness was terrifying. I made an appointment to get tested, though the anxiety of waiting for the results was almost unbearable. Throughout all this, I did my best to maintain some semblance of normalcy for our daughter. She was too young to understand what was happening, and I wanted to shield her from the turmoil as much as possible. I spent more time with her, taking her to the park, reading her favorite stories, and trying to keep her world intact despite the chaos around us. 2 days after the confrontation, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but I was determined to face them head-on. I knew I had to stay strong for my daughter and make decisions that would secure our future, even if it meant letting go of the life I once knew. You've been through an incredibly challenging and emotionally draining ordeal, and it's clear that you've done everything in your power to protect yourself and your daughter from the fallout of your ex-wife's actions. The way you've handled the situation, from seeking the truth to ensuring your daughter's well-being, is commendable, given the circumstances. Your decision to help your ex-wife find a new apartment and support her transition, despite everything that happened, speaks to your character. It's understandable that you wanted to ensure your daughter didn't have to live in less than ideal conditions, and it's clear that you prioritize her well-being above all else. The way you dealt with Hugo, by making sure the truth came to light and that those involved faced the consequences of their actions, shows your determination to hold people accountable for their behavior. It's not easy to take those steps, but you did what you felt was necessary to protect yourself and others from further harm. Regarding your daughter and the new baby, it must have been an incredibly tense and uncertain time waiting for the paternity results. Your decision to be there for the delivery, despite everything, shows your commitment to doing what's right. It's unfortunate that Hugo didn't step up initially, but it's good that your ex-wife eventually pursued child support, ensuring that he takes responsibility. It's understandable that you would want to keep your daughter away from a difficult life, especially when you have the means to provide for her. It's clear that you're working hard to give her the best life possible, and your full custody arrangement reflects your dedication to her upbringing. As you continue to move forward, it's important to keep focusing on what's best for your daughter and yourself. Healing from such a traumatic experience takes time, but it sounds like you've taken the necessary steps to rebuild your life. Surrounding yourself with supportive friends, family, and perhaps even seeking counseling could help you navigate the lingering emotions from this experience. You've shown immense strength in how you've handled everything, and your daughter is fortunate to have a father who is so committed to her happiness and well-being.